How's it going, guys? It's Eclipse here, and today's World of Tanks console video looks at the best tier 9 tanks within the game that you want to try and get your hands on yourself. And then we're going to have a look at some honourable mentions that are basically ones that you'll enjoy, so long as you take into account the fact that they're probably not going to be as competitive as some of these that we're going to outline today. Now, of course, some of these will differ to your opinion, and of course, depending on what kind of playstyle you use, then some of them might not actually fit your playstyle. So you've got to take that into account. There is not going to be one specific tank that everyone will play amazing in, but there is definitely a better chance using some of these tanks that you will perform better in games. And of course, we're going to have a look through them all. There will be timestamps that you can go through and look at each of the various different tanks within this video, and then at the end there'll be some honourable mentions and also some other World of Tanks best tanks guides for various different classes and also various different tiers as well. So if you want to have a look at those, they'll be at the end of the video. Now, as far as this video, of course, it wouldn't be basically a best tier 9 tanks without having the Conqueror in here. This is the tier 9 British heavy tank that leads on to the Chieftain. We've got the Super Conqueror and also the FV215B. Of course, on PC, that's slightly different. It only leads on to the Super Conqueror, I believe, because the FV215B and the Chieftain aren't actually in the game. But other than that, this tank is basically everything you need in terms of a heavy tank. It's fairly fast, 34 kilometers an hour is nothing to snuff at or sniff at, but basically, you've got accuracy. It's superb, basically, within the game, at least currently, because the accuracy buffs that we did get in Update 6.0 mean that this thing hits on the move all of the time, because it just has that little dispersion, which means that you can plow rounds into your opponents very, very easily, and it is just one of those tanks that you have to pick up within the game if you haven't already, and certainly if you enjoy playing heavy tanks, this one certainly has that armour. The turret armour of the thing is very, very strong frontally, the only weak point being that top cupola thing, but it's very, very hard to hit. And often people just miss anyway. So, it's a very, very strong turret in terms of how it plays. And also, if you're using your gun depression, it becomes basically nullified, that weak point. So you basically don't want to challenge a Conqueror if it does get hold down, which, of course, that means when the tank is only showing its turret. So there's no of the bottom half of the tank showing to the opponents. For those of you that don't know what hold down means, there's been a few comments in the comment section on a couple of my videos. So, in terms of the hull armour, not particularly the best. People can go through the upper plate of this thing if they catch you out in the open, but if you can get the bottom half of that lower plate kind of hidden away behind some sort of rock or some sort of obstacle, it does mean that the upper plate becomes slightly able to bounce. So you can bounce a few rounds, certainly from tier 7s that you'll meet in this tank, and that's kind of the sort of playstyle that you want to be using. Get hold down as much as possible, and you'll be having much better games in the Conqueror. And trust me, this thing certainly has a lot of good games. You've got 1950 hit points, so you're not lacking in that direction. You can also get some decent view range on this thing, 400 meters base. You're not going to be spotting, you're not a light tank or a medium, but as a heavy, this thing is basically the all-rounder. You've got pretty much everything in every sort of position. In terms of the setup, you want to be having ventilation, advanced loader, and also gun stabilizer. I guess you could swap out ventilation for the traction system just to improve the max speed of the tank slightly, and also improve the whole rotation speed, so you can basically counteract any light tanks that are going to try and get around you. It basically means that you'll turn faster by 10%, so that's always a bonus. If you want to do that, then make sure you put on that, and that's kind of the equipment slot that is kind of debatable. Ventilation, swap it out for coated optics if you want, or the traction system. That's basically where I'd go with the equipment on this tank. Of course, consumables, I always go with a large repair kit, a small med kit, because you don't actually really often get multiple crew members knocked out in succession. It's usually all at once within a game if you get unlucky. And then, of course, enhanced rations just to increase the amount of crew performance, which basically makes your tank just 15% better in a lot of different areas. And when you pop that boost, or it does have a passive boost for that, and you get an extra 15%. So when you actually pop that boost, so Really, really crucial kind of piece of premium consumable, and it's the one I'd put on personally as my first premium consumable if you want to spend that much per battle. You know, it's costing me 21,600 silver per battle, so take that into account. If you're willing to spend it to have those better games, then certainly do it, but if you're not, then and you're trying to save some silver, then that's kind of the way I'd take out those consumables, so that you can have a bit better of an earning potential in tanks like this. In terms of the rounds, obviously fire some premium every now and again. You do have really, really good premium rounds, so you'll meet tier 10s. You can go through the front of them very, very easily. E100 turrets, no problem. Just certainly a really, really good tank, and it's one that I would 100% recommend. And of course, that we have some gameplay of this thing on the channel if you want to check it out. As far as some other kind of tanks that you want to be having a look at, we will get right into those now. Now, if you are into your TDs, then you'll absolutely love the Object 704. This is the tier 9 Russian or Soviet tank destroyer within the game, and it certainly is one of those that you will 100% want to pick up if you haven't already played some high alpha TDs, or you haven't already gone through that line. The tanks leading up to it, you know, the SU-152, not a particularly great tank. The ISU-152 gets slightly better once you get the top gun on that thing. And then, of course, when you get to the Object 704, this thing is an absolute monstrosity. The armour actually works fairly well. You know, premium rounds, yes, they are the weak point of the tank, whereby you can just go straight through the front of it if you've got high enough penetration. But if you're wiggling and angling, the angles can get pretty wild on this thing, and often people will bounce off, or they'll hit your mantlet, which is also a really good, strong point of the tank. So you can see right here, the mantlet has a little bit of spaced in there, really, really strong, so people won't basically be able to pen your mantlet. And of course, you'll be smacking them for 750 alpha damage per shot, and it reloads fairly fast. You've got about a 16-second reload on this thing to do 750 alpha damage, probably with a boost from the DPM perks, rapid loading, and also having the equipment will basically boost this thing down to about 14-second reload from the top of my head. Don't know if it'll be slightly better than that. You'll have to obviously test it out. But in terms of how well this can play, obviously a tank that can do 750 alpha damage when it's fully upgraded, of course. This is the stock version. But yeah, this thing basically has got everything you need. Accuracy isn't even that bad, 0.39, get that down to probably 0.33. If you've got the perks on that increase the accuracy, you've got more than enough penetration at tier 9, 286mm of penetration on your standard rounds. This tank is basically an absolute monstrosity, and certainly you'll be having some fantastic games in it. I didn't 3-mark the tank, but having now seen it, I might actually go back and actually purchase it just to show it off. This thing really does. It's such a fun tank to play, and when you're slapping people for 750, it's always even more fun. So yeah, if I'm going to recommend a TD, certainly this one would be it. Of course, if you want to put some equipment in it, I would recommend actually boosting up the view range so that you can actually outspot opponents with this thing, because the still concealment isn't awful, and also if you put camo net on this and the coated optics or advanced optics, you'll basically be able to outspot opponents fairly easily and reliably, and when you're slapping them for 750, hiding it again, getting out of there, and then re-engaging them at a distance where you're going to outspot them again, you can rack up huge damage games very, very quickly. And of course, it would only take a couple of shots to do, you know, more than your hit points worth of damage. Certainly would recommend this to any of you watching this video. And if you haven't already, definitely try out some high alpha TDs, because they are a ton of fun within World of Tanks console. And the third tank on this list is the SKODA T50. Now, might be a strange one, I guess, to a couple of you guys who have never really thought about the SKODA T50. This is the Czechoslovakian tier 9 medium tank, and it's absolutely amazing within game, and it certainly is, I guess, slightly underrated, because I don't see too many of them in the matchmaker, And these things can have such good games. It's amazing within the game. And when you get this thing fully upgraded, you get a 3-shot autoloader, if I believe I'm correct. You get 320 alpha per shot. I think you reload in about 16 seconds, so it's a really, really quick reload. You also put out those shells really, really quickly as well. So between the clips the intra-clip reload is really, really slow. Really, really fast even. So the amount of time it takes to actually put out all of your damage, 960 alpha damage in the clip, means that you can basically then put out your damage real quick, get out of there, don't need to be sat in front of too many tanks whilst you're unloading your clip for very long, and then you can hightail it out of there, use the mobility of the tank, having 50 kilometers an hour forward, which is really, really nice. And certainly when you get the engine upgrade, this tank becomes a lot better, along with the turret and the top gun, of course. And then you can use this tank in any way that you want, basically. It's very, very flexible. You don't get the best gun depression out of everything in the game, but 8 degrees of gun depression is more than enough for most situations, and I would say that this is one of the better tier 9s in the game. Certainly for a medium tank, this thing kind of gets undervalued, and people kind of forget about it, but with that 960 alpha damage, don't forget, if you get clipped by one of these things, and trust me, they reload pretty fast as well, means that you can basically have some fantastic games when you're playing in them, and certainly a tank that if you put on some of the vision perks as well, you can boost up that vision, so you're getting spotted and actual damage within the game, and you can be a real influential part of the battlefield when you're fighting against some of the opposition numbered tanks, especially if they're mediums, because you can just take one of their hits for like 280, deal 960 back to them, then hightail it out of there, re-engage using that mobility and also using the vision of this tank to basically outspot and outmaneuver and also outthink your opponents very, very easily and outgun them very easily as well. So definitely a tank I would recommend for those of you who haven't. The tech tree, it's not the best coming up to the tier 9, but certainly the tier 9 and the tier 10 are one of my favourites medium tanks in the game, and I did 3 mark the TVP T50-51, which is amazing. Tier for tier, I'd actually say that the SKODA T50 is probably better, because you can come up against things like Tiger 1s, where they've basically got no chance. It's a free 960 hit points of damage should you be able to get any kind of shot on them. And you want to be aiming for that tracking and actual damage with the SKODA T50. And certainly, I hope that you guys kind of actually pick up on some of these tanks, maybe give them a go, and we'll see them in the matchmaker, because, boy, I've had so much fun with them. And at number 4 on our list, we have the Object 257. This thing is a monstrosity as well. This thing has really, really nice armor if you can get it into the right position. The frontal armor works fairly well, and certainly if you upgrade to the top package, where you get an upgraded turret as well, and you get those extra hit points, the extra view range, you also get the upgraded armor and layout. It basically makes the tank a lot better to come up against, and if you're trying to actually track and pen this thing, it's basically impossible. It's not actually possible to track and pen it realistically through the front drive wheel or the rear one, to be honest with you. And the side armor is just it's just a troll, basically. You have to fire in between the track and this top bit, because if you don't, you basically will hit a load of spaced armor and you're not going to pen. And also, it's so well angled, the actual hole below, that often you'll just ricochet off the side of it, so you have to kind of aim at that upper bit of the side, and even that's really well angled, so the armour of this thing is actually pretty troll. From the front, obviously, the lower plate is kind of the area that you want to be aiming at, because it has that kind of the angle that will probably best suit you. Even then, it's very, very well angled, and if people are moving up in hills and stuff like that, you can often bounce off this thing. Kind of depends on the playstyle of the player that actually uses it, if they're aggressive, that sort of thing. Of course, if they angle to the side, you can hit that frontal hull armor that's kind of becomes less angled towards you, so that's kind of the weak point of it. But even then, if they're wiggling around, they're moving around, it makes it very, very hard to hit the weak point of this tank. And so a lot of new players and beginners will find this tank quite a challenge to come up against, especially if they don't know the mechanics. Of course, If you can actually side scrape in this thing, then I would recommend it, but with that kind of angled pike nose that these Russian tanks get, it kind of makes it a little bit hard, and so you kind of have to just show that back part without actually showing any of the frontal bit of that armour where that pike nose goes up to. In terms of kind of weak points, your cupola, not possible to realistically hit this thing, especially if it's moving. It's not really a reliable area that you should be aiming at. Of course, if you get round to the back, obviously you'll be able to pen fairly reliably from that upper bit of the back of the tank and also through the back of the turret, but of course aim at the hull if you can, or if you've only got the back of the turret, then I guess you can shoot that. In terms of the gun of this thing, really, really good. 440 alpha damage. Obviously, 0.42 accuracy isn't the best in the game, but with the accuracy buffs, accuracy basically doesn't really mean much in World of Tanks console at least, and so when you're playing on your PS4 or Xbox One or whatever console you play on, you're not really going to have too much trouble with regards to firing at various different enemies that you're going to meet, and making sure that you're up close and personal means that you don't necessarily need the accuracy at 500 meters, you know, that sort of thing. And so, yeah, a fantastic tank. One that, you know, I think doesn't get seen as much within the matchmaker as I guess it should do, considering it is one of the better heavies at tier 9. Of course, you've got the E75 that you could have a look at as well if you like the gun depression and stuff like that, and the playstyle of the E75 and that Tiger line that leads up to it. But of course, it's up to you. Depends which one you want to go for. But in terms of like this guide, I guess the Russian one is a bit more new player or overall player friendly, because I think the E75 kind of lacks in a couple of areas. And yeah, I think that the armor, the way you have to use it, you know, angling, new players don't necessarily know that kind of playstyle. But it is a really good tier 9 heavy, and certainly one of the most competitive out there out of them all. And the final tank on our list is the Centurion Mark 7/1. This is an amazing medium tank at the tier. It is one of the better ones within the game. Of course, we have some good artillery pieces, you know, the M53-55, which is really, really good artillery. And of course, in terms of playing those, that is the best one at tier 9 in my opinion. But we won't get into those in this video. This one is purely focused on actual tanks. We're not going to be looking at artillery, but we will have some honourable mentions at the end of this video. Now, Centurion Mark 7/1, what is kind of interesting about this tank? Well, of course, a while ago, well, quite a few years ago actually, we actually got a turret buff to the Centurion Mark tanks basically. So the Centurion 1 and also the Centurion 7/1 and the Action X actually got turret buffs, which make their turrets a lot more reliable. Now this is, of course, is a stock one, I believe, but when you do get the top turret, you get more hit points, you get better view range, and you get a better, more strong turret, or a stronger turret, I should say even. Excuse my English. Now, in terms of what actually this plays like, basically you want to be brawling in this thing, and with the top package gun that you get this this really fantastic one where you get 390 alpha damage. Can't actually see it in game because I don't know why Wargaming do that. But yeah, this one is one that you must get if you haven't played any of the British mediums. It certainly is a line that I would recommend, because all of them give a kind of a different kind of play style, but they all play the same, if that kind of makes sense. The Comet is one of those faster ones where you're relying on using the detection system within the game, where you learn the spotting, and then as you get through the tiers, you're using that up to the FE4202 or the Action X that you can get at tier 10. And certainly this thing really does work well. One of the better ones, of course, when you get the horsepower upgrade, that is kind of when the tank becomes good, because before then you're kind of slow. Certainly stock, the Centurion Mark 7/1 isn't the best, but when you are fully upgraded, you get Hesh rounds, you also get standard pen rounds, which are like 256, I believe. Not entirely sure. Obviously, in the comment section down below, let me know what they are if they change, but I can't actually look at them right now because I don't own the tank, and apparently you can't actually look at the gun upgrades without it saying that you have to have a different turret. But what this tank does offer is that kind of all-round versatile medium tank that you can use pretty much in every single different situation within the game. Use the turret armor to go hold down. Don't rely on it against high alpha or high penetration TDs like the Jaegeru. Of course, they're probably going to pen your turret just because they have that high penetration. But against tanks of the similar tier with the same kind of packages, you know, the medium tanks of the tier 9s and tier 10s, they're going to be finding quite a struggle to go through the turret of the 7/1 if you hold down. Of course, we mentioned that earlier, what hold down was about. And if you make sure to hide the lower plate of this thing, it can bounce a couple off of its lower plate, but the upper plate isn't the most fantastic. So you kind of want to be kind of angling at all times, trying to get those tracks in the way of anyone that's going to be aiming at you. And of course, moving side to side as and when you can when you're reloading. Of course, don't move side to side when you're aiming, because that's just going to make your aim go worse. But when you are reloading and you're facing off against someone, angling and wiggling and put in a kind of position in where they're going to be aiming for the lower plate, and then you kind of go like that, and then they're going to hit the tracks and not pen. Something that you want to be doing in your medium tanks, and also any kind of fast whole traverse tank. Of course, if you're in an E100, when you're moving like this, obviously no one's going to kind of miss very easily, but when you're in a kind of fast tank that can move side to side fairly reliably, obviously you can bounce a couple of shots, and that's what you want to aim for in the Centurion Mark 7/1. And of course, when you've got 390 alpha that you can punish them back with, then this tank becomes really, really fun to play, and it is one I would recommend at tier 9. Of course, tier 9s being one of the better tiers in terms of competitiveness. You can meet tier 7s, but you can only meet tier 10s, so yeah, really, really good tanks in the game. If you want to have a look at some other tanks that I'd recommend that are a bit more novel and kind of niche, whereby they're really, really good, but you have to kind of know the mechanics on how to use them, then of course we have things like the T30. You know, it's not the most overpowered tier 9 within the game, but in certain situations where you've got that 700 and I think it's 750 alpha, but I'm not entirely sure. We will just double check that. On this gun, yeah, that's the one you want to be using in terms of having a bit more fun. You got 750 alpha, you have a decent turret against the tier 9s, but the top of the turret is kind of the weak point against some tier 10s where they can actually overmatch your turret. So be careful of that. Really, really fun tank to play. Certainly isn't overpowered. Certainly isn't a tank that is going to necessarily win you games because of the poor DPM that it gets. But it is a really, really fun one to play. In terms of artillery, obviously we mentioned the M53-55, which is just a ridiculous artillery. You know, everyone knows about it. It has this really, really good gun arc that this thing gets. Gun depression, heat rounds, it's just basically got everything you want in a tank when you're fully upgraded, at least within that thing. Of course, M103, decent heavy tank, not particularly my favourite. I think the turret is just so weak, and the hull armour is just so weak that you're basically a worse version of the Conqueror. I would 100% go with the Conqueror over this tank in every day of the week. I guess if you want the E5, then go down the M103 line, and the previous tanks are pretty competitive with the T29 and the T32. So I guess if you want those kind of tanks within the game. As far as some more novel or niche ones, the Object 430-2 is actually a really underrated tank. The DPM that this thing gets, and also the armour is kind of troll. It's bouncy, this thing's fast, it's basically really good at side scraping as well. A tank that I would 100% recommend to maybe a little bit more of an experienced player, someone that's played it more than a couple of thousand games, you know, looking at that 5,000 game mark. You'll definitely be able to use this really, really competitively, and it certainly is that. It's also a bundle of fun for you to actually have a go at. Of course, there's a couple others. The T10, a good heavy tank as well. As far as some other TDs, you know, you've got things like the Waffle Panzer IV, which are fairly decent. Light tanks, T54 lightweight is actually a good one. And then you've got the RU-251 Spar Panzer. Really, really good one. Certainly medium tanks that are a bit more paper. You've got the Leopard PTA, which is okay. So it's basically better tier for tier than the Leopard 1, I guess. And then you've got things like the Malchen, but I wouldn't ever really play that. It's just pretty terrible. But yeah, really, really good tanks overall at tier 9. I feel like it's one of the more competitive tiers in the game, and one of the ones that you can have some good fun in. things like the Emil 2 are also ones that can be played really, really well if you actually use it right, use the turret armor. But other than that, I think that's pretty much covered my top 5 tanks that I would recommend. Of course, you will have some differences in opinion, and let me know in the comment section down below which ones you changed, which tanks you actually thought were better than what I've said they are. And then we'll get a bit of a discussion, and obviously people can look down there in the future to have a look at what kind of tanks the community would suggest, because obviously my opinion is my own, and other people have slight different changes in opinion and throughout whatever they've played. And of course, I'm not necessarily the best one for maybe some tank destroyers, because I don't particularly like playing some of the lightly armoured tank destroyers like the Waffle Panzer IV, so maybe my opinion is slightly skewed as to what tier 9s I prefer. So yeah, let me know in the comment section down below. Of course, if you want to check out other videos, there will be some on screen right now that you can have a look at. But other than that, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I hope to see you in the next video. Goodbye.